This is Command Post, a series of discussions about military matters from Time and the Center for a New American Security.
So Andrew, President Obama has repeatedly said there will be no U.S. combat boots on the ground inside Libya. It reminds me of Kosovo, where President Clinton talked about no ground troops going in there. Maybe this is a necessary thing for a president to do politically, but for soldiers or for commanders, does it make sense militarily to put such an edict out like that?
Okay, two quick things here. First off, it makes a lot of sense, and we can all understand why the president would not want to commit more boots on the ground, especially after the experiences of Iraq and Afghanistan. This president, I think, had envisioned himself ending the American involvement in those two wars, and to start another conflict in Libya in which we're committing troops on the ground. I think he justifiably fears what that would do for his base, and that's probably just not the way he envisions himself as a president, starting other wars, other U.S. ground commitments. Second, if you do decide to commit the U.S. military to these types of operations, I would say there's about a 1-to-1 ratio between the enthusiasm the military has for conducting these operations and the enthusiasm political decision makers have at home for these operations. There's very little enthusiasm in Washington on both sides of the aisle for any type of comprehensive campaign in Libya that would involve ground troops.
But what about just a handful? What about just spotters for airstrikes, which apparently the president has ruled out? I mean, just a very thimbleful of troops.
And here you get at two things. First off, there's this issue with post-conflict reconstruction. If it begins right now, then you need those troops committed right now. Maybe not troops, but maybe you have police trainers, military trainers. I mean, who's conducting a train and equip mission with these Libyan armed forces? Who's ensuring that they're not committing rights violations? Who's working to build up the institutions of Eastern Libya? I mean, can we put USAID workers on the ground? Can we put State Department officials on the ground? Can we put Department of Defense civilian officials on the ground? And so far, we can't put DoD civilian officials on the ground. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
Paul, do you have a sense of the wisdom here?
Well, the idea of post-conflict stabilization is a very complex one. You can put people on the ground in Libya. I mean, the Brits are on the ground now doing certain train and equip kinds of things. But there are other sorts of people who could conceivably be put in there who are not DoD. State Department has the coordinator for reconstruction and stabilization, the Office of Reconstruction and Stabilization, that is supposed to maintain a Rolodex file of retired former officials, experts who they can call up and say, we need you in Libya.
Like kind of civilian response corps.
Exactly right. But the problem with it is that it's not matured yet. It has never been fully funded by the Congress, even though there are members of Congress who say we got to do this. The House just cannot see any reason to fund anything related to foreign operations. In fact, the chairwoman of the Foreign Ops Committee in the House has vowed to slash in the next fiscal year the current level of funding for foreign operations by 52%.
That's right.
And it's just going down and down and down when foreign operations accounts for so little of our budget.
And the return on investment is so high.
Exactly
by preventing situations that may make it necessary to commit large numbers of U.S. troops later.
The return on the long-term investment, and see, that's where I think members of Congress are a little uneasy because they can't see long-term. They can only see 2 years to their next re-election.
And this is in part because we look at national defense and security as kind of national security as two different things. We'll never cut the defense budget, or you'll have strong reaction against cutting the defense budget. But our development and aid programs, our foreign service officers, our State Department budget, that's not seen as part of the national security budget, which is absurd. It makes sense to consider those part and parcel with the hard security stuff we do in the Department of Defense.
And this lack of civilian capacity both in Libya and for future campaigns is going to make it more likely that there's going to be a heavier burden placed on the U.S. military.
Yeah, the U.S. Institute of Peace cost roughly the amount that a rifle infantry platoon costs to be in Afghanistan for a year, about $42 million, about that much. And yet, this is part of this these budget cuts. We'd never consider cutting, rifle infantry platoon from Afghanistan, but we'll cut USIP, we'll cut those civilian organizations, we'll cut our civilian capacity because that's just seen as politically more palatable. It's nonsense. I think there's a reason why we do this. The response you get is, oh, well, we need these things for the Iraq War, and we're never going to do that again. But that's just like we never were going to do Vietnam again. We were never going to do these large resource-intensive counterinsurgency campaigns. I'm all in favor of never doing these campaigns again. But political decision makers have a funny habit of getting us into these types of low-intensity conflicts and stability operations where you need capacities and capabilities that you're not going to find organic to a light infantry battalion.
And we're making decisions now about those capabilities that we are not going to have when we need them. This is not something that you can buy off the shelf. So we need to be very careful about the long-term strategic implications of the short-term budgetary decisions we're making.